Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the 19th of April 2024. Let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Some, I guess, middle of the road figures for the Ukrainians here. 870 personnel loss for the Russians, which is fairly decent. We haven't really seen low figures, and by low I mean in the 5, even 600s for quite some time. It's been sort of 700s to just over 1,000. That's been the normal range. So 870 is obviously a meaningful number for the Ukrainians. There 9 tanks, 17 APVs, and 21 artillery systems. That's kind of around the average mark for those systems. 2 anti-aircraft warfare pieces there taken out. Don't know what they are exactly. We'll look at Andrew Perpetua's lost stats to see if any of this tracks. 53 vehicles and fuel tanks is fairly heavy in that category. So I guess it depends what's going on in terms of the weather on the front lines. I get a sense that things are only really happening in a relatively small number of places on the front line at the moment, as the Russians are either fully running out or reconstituting to go in a larger offensive in maybe summer, as is touted by some people. In order to do that, they need to be saving troops and equipment up for that. I don't know. We shall see. If we go to Andrew Perpetua's stats, I mean, you can see just unbelievable numbers of kit. Numbers of pieces of equipment here, just incredible. So that may even be one of the longest I've seen, although he's not mentioned that it's the record number. We can see, okay, let's go to the Ukrainians first. It's probably a 5-to-1 ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses, something like that. I'm sure someone will let me know. But it's a fairly sizable ratio in favour of the Ukrainians. Now, bad news is we have 2 destroyed MiG-29s taken out by Iskander-M cluster munition. We'll come on to that. I did mention that yesterday. I think it was either in response to, or the footage was released in response to, the big Jankoy attack that took out the S-400 systems. I say systems, there's talk about there being multiple elements and maybe more than one battery. I don't know. But anyway, a lot of kit was taken out in Jankoy. And the Russians then released footage of 2 MiGs getting taken out, at least in the Dnipro area, the Dnipro airport there. So then we have some air defense systems. So a Strela 10, and then a launcher and a universal mast that goes with that air defense system. And I think those 2 pieces were part of the MiG-29 strike there, so that they took all of that stuff out, which is a really significant hit for the Russians there. They've done a good job of taking out those Ukrainian bits of kit. We've got an excavator, crane truck, a couple of boats being sunk, some old howitzers and other bits and pieces that aren't particularly valuable, but basically those first 5, if you include the Strela 10, which is a short-range air defense system, not insanely valuable, but you add those 5 together and that's a lot of kit that the Ukrainians have lost that is incredibly valuable and will possibly overcome literally all of this kit here, depending on what we have. If we come up to the top of the Russian, we have a Strela 10, so they've lost one as well. Then some surveillance and comms equipment, boats, and old D-20 howitzers there. Quite a few tanks taken out here, including a T-90M damaged in a night vision attack there. But a range of tanks otherwise, T-62s, 72s, 80s. Infantry fighting vehicles, just a lot of those destroyed, and a fair number of APCs, and just huge numbers of trucks. And I guess the question is what were in those trucks? A lot of them damaged. You can't tell whether they've been destroyed. What happens with a lot of first-person view drone footage is that you will see the drone cut out as it hits the vehicle, and you don't always have a spotted drone to see what happens to the vehicle. So it's been damaged, but you just don't know how much it's been damaged, whether it's been completely taken out. So there's a lot of area for not quite knowing how significant your hits have been. And when we come to these civilian vehicles, there's an awful lot of properly destroyed stuff, and that will be with spotter drones confirming that they have been definitely taken out. But you can see there's an awful lot of kit that the Russians will have lost or had damaged over the last 24 hours, although some of this footage will be montages for like the previous week or two, or whatever. Different units provide footage in different ways. So on any other day, this is a staggering number of losses for the Russians. Absolutely incredible numbers. But for the Ukrainians, although they've lost 4 or 5 times fewer bits of kit, the value of those 2 MiGs and the surface-to-air missile launcher and other bits of kit is just, it really does make it look like a worse day for the Ukrainians there. Now, the big news that's coming out this morning, there's an awful lot of talk about this, is that a Tu-22 long-range bomber has been shot down. Reports that one of the pilots at least is dead, although the Russians are claiming it was not shot down. It was a technical error and the pilots are fine. It doesn't seem to be what open source is indicating. Anton Gerashchenko talks about this. This is really significant, by the way. Main Director of Intelligence of Ukraine has published a video of our defenders working to shoot down a Tu-22M3 bomber that launched missiles at Ukraine today. So apparently, I think it was in the air, it launched its missiles and then was blown up. But there's a second one that turned around. We'll talk about that in a second. The enemy Tu-22 M3 aircraft was shot down at a distance of about 300 kilometers from Ukraine. Wow. Using the same means that has previously hit a Russian A-50 long-range radar detection and control aircraft. As a result of the damage, the bomb was able to fly to Stavropol area where it crashed. Quote, for the first time during a combat mission, actually in the air during the period of a full-scale invasion, the aircraft was shot down. That is, another plane that was following him was forced to turn around. And that means a number of rockets have not been fired over Ukraine, according to Defense Intelligence. And we have this is supposedly video footage of the air defense system that was taking out that long-range bomber. Really significant. This is a big change, and we've got footage of the plane. In fact, we'll go to Special Kherson Cat to look at what imagery we've got. So you've got the plane falling to the ground. It's a Tu-22 M3 supersonic long-range strategic strike bomber. So crashed in the Stavropol region of Russia near the village of Bogomolov. Footage of the crash site of the Russian bomber. According to Russian Ministry of Defense, the plane crashed whilst returning to its home airfield after Russian night missile attack on Ukraine. As claimed by Russian Ministry of Defense, the cause of the crash was a technical malfunction. Also, other Russian sources report that 1 crew member has died. Dnipropetrovsk region of Ukraine has suffered as a result of the Russian night missile attack on Ukraine, in which the Russian Tu-22 also took part. The Tu-22 was launching Kh-22 long-range anti-ship missiles. Interestingly, 2 anti-ship missiles were shot down, which is good news for the air defense capabilities. At this moment, it's known that 8 people were killed, 29 people were injured. So some really horrific strikes last night on Dnipropetrovsk. We'll come to this in the next section, but it's not cool. But to have one of those aircraft that was doing that damage effectively, was releasing those missiles, to have one of those shot down from 300 kilometers is incredible. Now, if that was genuinely shot down by an air defense missile, then that missile has crossed the entirety of the Ukraine-occupied region, say southern Donetsk. We'll look at where this took place. I think there's a map coming up. It's just quite incredible. Anyway, according to Ukrainian claims, it was shot down as a result of air defense. There's talk about it being S-200. These might be like heavily adapted, much older air defense missiles, but I can't talk to that really. Reported crash site of the Russian Tu-22 M3 somewhere near Bogomolov Stavropol region. It's approximately 365 kilometers from the front line. So in order for your air defense missile to have hit this plane, I mean, it's gone quite some considerable distance. Now, that plane crash there might have just limped before it kind of really started getting into trouble and falling out the sky. So it might have been actually hit further towards Rostov-on-Don, but I don't know that. Its missiles struck Dnipro there. Incredible if that has been shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. Next, they're reporting that one crew member has supposedly been killed, according to Russian Regional Governor Vladimirov. Now the search for the other pilot continues, so they're not even sure where the other one is. Earlier, it was reported that the two pilots were found and they were receiving medical attention. So the immediate reaction by the Russians is to say everything's fine, it was a technical malfunction. But the problem is they then have to control open source sources releasing more accurate news. The idea that the crew lived, and then that's then put to bed as a claim by Russians themselves. Fighter bomber also said something too. That's the Russian pilot who has his own Telegram channel. Quite useful to follow him because he's fairly accurate when bad things happen. I think that's excellent for the Ukrainians to do that, to be able to shoot down that long range bomber and take it out, and then to change the behavior of the second one so that it didn't shoot off missiles. And then it's going to be, well, what happens going forward? Are the Russians going to be afraid? Do we not see them send up those bombers, or do they get over it and send them up? And do the Ukrainians take out some more bombers, or do they move their air defenses to a safer place to save their air defenses from being taken out? So lots of different scenarios that could come about from that strike, but that's definitely significant for the Ukrainians. And indeed, when you look at the infographic for the air, I guess the Air Force losses, in terms of the Russian losses and the Ukrainian Air Force doing the damage, and it's a real bumper list, as Tim White says. The Ukrainians managed to shoot down all of this kit overnight, so there's a Tu-24 plane at the centre. But as Tim White says, significant is the claim that they shot down 2 Kh-22 missiles for the first time. Some new air defence gear must be in use already. Interesting. So we got 14 drones. I don't know if that's 14 out of 14 or whether some drones got through. You got 2 Kh-101 or Kh-555 cruise missiles, 11 Kh-59 or Kh-69. I think, if their Kh-69's in there, the newer one, that's good to shoot down that many. And then 2 Kh-22s, which is really good because they are anti-ship missiles that are fairly difficult to shoot down. And then, of course, the Tu-22 M3 bomber in the middle there. So really good night for the Ukrainian Air Force there, although some stuff did get through, and Dnipro, for example, was particularly hit. Berdyansk was hit in the occupied territories of Ukraine. So that was yesterday. I think Belgorod was also fairly active too. So the Ukrainians still hitting a number of different targets in occupied territory and over the border into Russia. We don't always see footage of that, and I just think there's stuff that happens, very often, almost nightly, and we very rarely see the end result of that. GoPro footage from yesterday's launches of the Ukrainian ATACMS missiles. So there's been a lot of talk about whether they were ATACMS that took out the air base at Jankoy and the S-400 systems. Well, now it seems from GoPro footage that it was indeed ATACMS, filmed by an M270 MLRS operator. So that's absolutely fantastic that they are using ATACMS. I think it would have been slightly preferable had they been using indigenous missiles, just because it shows that they had created that capability themselves, and then they can just make, hopefully, it all comes down to then production at scale. But if they're using ATACMS to do that, then they are, of course, dependent upon the US to provide those ATACMS. In Dnipro, bus station was hit. Last couple of minutes, just been told that one of the children injured in the attacks has died in hospital. The death toll is now 9. This is absolutely horrific. It's just horrific. These are civilian targets or civilian infrastructure that is being hit by the Russians on a continued basis. And actually, we're going to no, let's go there now before we come to that. We'll do that later. So Kryvyi Rih was also hit, which is another city in the... I'll show you on that map, actually, if I have that map still up. Let's go there, yeah. So you've got Kryvyi Rih over there, Dnipro over here. These have been hit by aerial bombardments from that Tu-22 that was shot down, one presumes. And yeah, so Kryvyi Rih was also hit. That's where Zelensky was born, if you are interested. And we have Jay in Kyiv here getting pretty angry with what's going on. Screams, he says, several families wiped out, dead kids, just another day in Ukraine as air defenses can no longer stop Russian missiles targeting residential buildings full of sleeping families. It's pretty horrific stuff, and he understandably is not happy. I just want to play you this clip. Now, just to let you know, I am going to do... I'm JP and I approve these messages. And there were some Democrat politicians who were just given some great rhetoric yesterday. I'm going to follow that up with a bit of balance with some GOP politicians who have had some great rhetoric as well. It came out after I did that video. Otherwise, I would have included it in the same video. But you've got Mike Turner and Mike Pence giving some much needed Republican rhetoric concerning support for Ukraine, because it gets really frustrating because you look at those strikes on places like Dnipro and you hear about the death of children and you get this absolute moral monster. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I honestly, of all human beings in the world at the moment, bar like Putin and the Russians, I don't know. I almost think she's worse in some ways. There's some visceral reaction I have to her. Is that how can you be so evil? How can you be so downright despicable? I don't get it. Anyway, this is just her speaking to Dr. Timothy Schneider, as he's got Dr. Schneider written there, but she, with complete contempt, almost spits his name out as Mr. Schneider. And then she's so horrible. But his response, I think, is perfect. And I mean, he's awesome, Timothy Snyder. But it's kind of this idea that you are the one that's supporting Nazis here. When you look at the genocidal attempts and the striking of those buildings in Dnipro this morning, then this has even greater, I think, resonance.
So when you want to talk about misinformation, Mr. Snyder, you might actually look a little closer. So when you want to talk about misinformation, Mr. Snyder, you might actually look a little closer to American media if you don't like what they're saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, does he have the opportunity to respond to the gentlelady?
Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't ask him a question,
No, her
Mr.
time's
Raskin.
expired.
You asked multiple questions.
First of all, I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully. On the question of Nazis, I've written 2 books as a historian about Nazis and the Holocaust. On the question of Ukrainian nationalism, I am the leading scholar of that subject in North America and have been writing about it for 20 years. If the chamber is interested...
I freaking love that. It's like, you stay in your lane, matey. I am the expert on this. In fact, I'm the leading expert in this country, in North America, in this country, and will include Canada too. And do you know what? You're not only wrong, you are very wrong. You are exactly 180 degrees wrong.
In the degree of far-right participation in Ukrainian politics, you can be assured that no far-right party has ever crossed 3% in Ukrainian election. So, of course, there are bad people in every country, but by any comparative standard is a very small phenomenon. In Russia, on the other hand, the army includes openly Nazi formations, such as Rushich. The government itself is fascist in character and it is carrying out a war which includes deportation of children by the tens of thousands, the open intention of destroying a state, as well as mass torture. So if we're looking for fascism, and if there is anyone who is sincerely concerned about halting fascism or racism, you would wish to halt Russia.
And actually, we'll in my next video, one of my next videos, when we look at the geopolitical section, Marjorie Taylor Greene, with her amendments to the Ukraine aid bill, has shown herself to be an absolutely disgusting human being. And there's no other way. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. She is a disgusting human being. And I keep saying, look, she needs to be educated, but you just wonder whether anyone like that, that's so far deep in it, can be educated. I would love her to sit down with Timothy Snyder for like 6 hours and get her educated on that region, because she's casting her opinion. She's making laws in the US concerning foreign policy. And I know more about this conflict than she does, by a country mile here, by a distance of orders of magnitude greater than a country mile. Like, she knows almost nothing, and what she thinks she does know is entirely Russian disinformation. She is regurgitating full-on 100% Russian talking points. Like, she is getting given Russian narrative to splurge out in Congress. Like, how she's not being investigated, I don't know. And she is therefore being dangerous. You can talk about freedom of speech, but if you are acting as a Russian agent, an enemy state agent within Congress of the US, then I think freedom of speech needs to be weighed up against national security and international global security. And I think she needs to be investigated, and I think she needs to learn a damn sight more than she's evidently knows at the moment. Right, let's go to Anton Gerashchenko with the other bits and pieces before I get too angry. I'm just going to have to edit this bit back in because I forgot to talk in my, getting too het up with a rant. I forgot to talk about the actual MiG-29 losses and the video footage we have for that. But we're going to rewind. I said this, I think, in one of my news pieces, but it wasn't in my hits and losses video yesterday. But when the Ukrainians did hit the Jankoy air base with the ATACMS, they took out 4, according to the Ukrainian Defense of Ukraine, their MOD, if you like, they took out 4 S-400 air defense missile launchers, incredibly valuable. 3 radar detection systems, wow. Air Defense Command and Control Center, super valuable. Fundament M airspace surveillance equipment, incredibly important. So Colby Badwa says, wow, Fundament M is very rare, high-level IAMDS, so that's command and control, brings in all of your different air defense assets into one sort of network, one system. Destroying one of these, in addition to the full S-400 battery, is quite a feat. So the Ukrainians really did an insanely good job of taking out equipment at Jankoy that was of incredibly high value, both functional and monetary value. Then the Russians released this footage. Now, I don't know, as I've said, whether this was actually at the time, whether they did this as a response to Jankoy, or whether they just kept this footage back. I said that yesterday, and they do that sometimes, which is, destroy certain Ukrainian things, but don't shout about it because they understand the importance of the narrative and controlling the information space. And so they keep it for when Ukraine declares some really high value targets being destroyed, and then they'll put this out in the information spaces as a counter. But anyway, up to 3 Air Force MiG-29s were damaged. There are various claims about this. One claim is that one of the MiGs had not been used since 2022, so it's not as big a loss as the others. And then claim that one was destroyed and one damaged. Nonetheless, definitely, I think 2 destroyed. But the silver lining is that one of them might not have been operational. And then, yeah, you can see there, I can't really show you closely videos because I get in trouble, but the cluster munitions were what did it and used effectively to destroy those pieces of equipment. So that's the value of cluster munitions to be used against air bases is incredible. You don't want to send a single missile, say a Storm Shadow, to take out one plane, which is, these are good for taking out buildings. They got broach warheads, these kind of two-stage warheads where they explode to get through the outer shell of whatever it is. They're called bunker busters. And then the second explosive and more powerful one explodes inside. You don't want to send that onto a runway, really. It's a waste of a weapon. It's not really what it's designed for. What you want for these large open spaces where you have equipment that's been spread out so they can't get taken out by one missile taking out 3 bits of kit, you spread them out. So, okay, then we'll need 10 missiles to take out 10 helicopters or 10 planes. And actually, we don't know that we want to use, I still would probably say cruise missiles to take out a plane might still be a worthy I guess trade-off, but nonetheless, cluster munitions here, Iskander M cluster was used, but ATACMS used for the Ukrainians would, they drop those bomblets over a wide area, and you can get an awful lot of equipment destroyed or damaged with one missile. So it's cluster munitions. And when it's first announced that the Ukrainians were going to get ATACMS, but they're going to get the cluster variants and not the unitary warhead, a lot of people were quite upset because they're like, oh, that's not going to destroy the Crimean Bridge, and actually they're not quite as good and as powerful as a unitary warhead. Whereas actually the reality is they're much better for what they need, which is taking out air bases. Absolutely, cluster munitions on the ATACMS are what Ukraine need more of at the moment, I would say. Absolutely need to just rinse the air bases behind the lines in occupied Ukrainian territory. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Why is it important to pass Ukraine's Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 2024, financial assistance to Ukraine, and what will likely happen? In fact, I might leave this to... No, let's just go through it now, because it does fit in with the other videos. But anyways, it's Anton Gerashchenko's opinion and evaluation here. What will likely happen when it's supported by a majority of lawmakers from both parties and promptly signed by the US into law by US President Biden? This means that the arms and ammunition which Ukraine has been in short supply of may already be sent to Ukraine in the coming weeks. Deliveries will be made, among other things, from US bases and depots in Europe. Now, I wonder if they've actually transported stuff to Europe, to American bases in Europe, to just ahead of this, so things can happen more quickly. That'd be very interesting. Add to this the fact that Europe, whose economic potential is 10 times greater than Russia's, has also become active in matters of military aid for Ukraine, financing Ukraine through various arms conditions and on a bilateral basis. So, by the beginning of the probable Russian summer offensive, the situation may be as follows. Ukraine has partially managed to build defense structures comparable to the Russian Surovikin line, so that's good news. Ukraine has adopted a new version of the law of mobilization, which will increase the number of soldiers in the Ukrainian army. You can debate whether that mobilization law is good enough and whether it's actually, in some aspects, counterproductive because it doesn't include demobilization, which won't be discussed for another 8 months, and that is bad for Ukrainian morale. However, it will add boots to the ground. Just how many we don't know. The first batches of ammunition will soon be delivered to Ukraine as part of the Czech initiative to buy 1 million shells for Ukraine. The US aid bill to Ukraine includes a transfer of long-range ATACMS missiles, not included in the previous version of the aid package. The precedent of transferring even a small number of such missiles will, quote, move the issue of supplying similar weapons by European countries, particularly Germany, off the ground. So you might then start seeing Taurus be talked about with greater confidence. Ukraine will receive F-16s in the summer of 2024, for which crews have already been trained. This will significantly reduce Russia's air advantage in the air, in particular the possibility of using carbs on the front line. There will be an increase in the number of modern air defense systems that will protect Ukrainian infrastructure and military logistic chains. In addition to the prompt delivery of Patriot batteries from Germany, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte's initiative to purchase similar systems from third countries is promising. Ukraine was able to establish its own production of missiles and long-range drones, including Neptune missiles, which previously existed only in single copies. In this context, curious events may already take place in Crimea in the coming months. In any case, the ability of Ukraine of Ukrainians to work in the rear has grown by leaps and bounds, and this is noticeable even in regions far removed from Russian combat zones. It would be wise to remember that the capture of small Avdiivka cost the Russian armed forces tens of thousands of dead Russian occupiers. It is simply impossible to imagine the cost of capturing Kharkiv or focusing on the Dnipro River. It would mean hundreds of thousands of dead Russians. So the conclusions are: one, the West does not demonstrate fatigue from Ukraine. Despite various inconsistencies and difficulties, the scale of military assistance is increasing. Two, the Kremlin is under the illusion of the ability to control the development of the conflict. This situation is reminiscent of the first months of the war. Putin, having started the war, did not calculate the possible consequences. Now he has no way to stop. He has dragged Russia into the war from which he did not foresee a way out. Three, many military analysts claim that Russian armed forces have already squeezed the maximum out of the situation when Ukraine experienced interruptions in supplies of equipment and ammunition. At the same time, its successes are tactical, while the loss of manpower and equipment are huge. Now, this is interesting because at the moment, without knowing how many troops they've got training behind the lines, if indeed they have any meaningful numbers of troops doing that, I would agree with that. I think now's the time to attack, and this is why we have seen Russia throw the kitchen sink at some of these areas, like Chasiv Yar, Avdiivka, and Krasnohorivka, Novomykhailivka. And I think you're seeing them struggle to gain ground there, although they are gaining ground because the Ukrainians are on their knees, right? But the Russians, I think, have this window at the moment to gain the most. And if they don't gain the most now, then I think that tells you an awful lot about their ability to actually make any meaningful successes out of this war. 4, even a hypothetical success of a future Russian offensive will not lead to the end of the war and the surrender of Ukraine. 5, no offensive is possible without mass mobilization. Another 1 to 2 million Russians would need to be mobilized. In addition, numerous losses will have to be compensated by new waves of mobilization. And by the way, if that happens, the Russian economy will absolutely tank. Like, you will get so much discontent in Russia, and this is why they haven't done it. But they need to. But it will be the end of Putin, I think, if it came to like the mobilization of 1 million people. 6, intoxicated by the election victory, Putin ignores the risks. Attempts to seize another 100 square kilometers of Ukraine will provoke increased internal instability in Russia itself. Exactly. And number 7, judging by the mood of Russians, support for the war is falling. According to the Russian field polls, 70% of Russians favour the start of peace talks, 49% favour unconditional peace, and another 21% would support Putin if he signs a peace agreement. Hawks made up 19% of the total mass. At the same time, only 6% are irreconcilable, demanding to wage war until complete victory and the capture of Kyiv, Warsaw, Berlin and Paris. So there's only 6% of Russians that really want to go to the max in terms of war. And it seems like the majority are up for stopping it in some way now. Okay, moving on to other bits of news. A pipeline exploded in Kharkiv region, local media has reported. So I don't think that's anything to do with the war, but that's not good for energy infrastructure for the Ukrainians. And this is footage of a Russian Su-25 attack aircraft operating close to Chasiv Yar. We've seen this a number of times. In fact, is that no, it's not two. It is just a single one there. This is an issue, and the Ukrainians definitely need air defense ammunition, air defenses as a whole. Now, at the beginning of the war, or sort of 6 months into the war, we weren't seeing activity too much like that because manpads had such an effect. We had there are two aircraft. I thought there were Ukrainians using manpads effectively, man-portable air defense systems, something like Stinger, shoulder-launched missiles that have a range of maybe 5 kilometers plus, taking out Russian aircraft. And so they stopped doing stuff like this. This just shows that the Ukrainians do not even have Stingers and other manpads available at the moment. And that is really worrying. Some of those, what we would have previously thought were like the staple diet of the Ukrainian weaponry, they're just no longer using. Or at least, they've run out of them in a lot of places. Zelensky and Ukraine's army has acted quickly after the justifiable protests I wrote about yesterday over the media manager in the south. Natalia Humanyuk. This is Tim White saying that, and I reported this quite briefly actually, but there's been these protests about Natalia Humanyuk, who's a spokesperson for Operational Command South, and she's not allowed journalists access, or she's, I don't know the exact details, but she's not been very popular as of late. You remember Hannah Malyar? She was another one that ended up going. Well, now Humanyuk has been sacked, and she's one of I probably said her name more than any other Ukrainian, I reckon, across my news pieces, because she tells us what's been going on in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions on a daily basis. And when the Institute for the Study of War release those daily reports, it's often her that I am referencing. And so, yeah, she's now been sacked. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know the ins and outs of that. Another drone strike, I haven't reported these, but they have been going on over the last couple of weeks, and to the point where the International Atomic Energy Agency has got involved. But there's been another drone strike hitting Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. The Ukrainians, this is the third attack on the training center in 2 weeks. The Ukrainians blame the Russians blame the Ukrainians. International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Grossi says, not General Grossi, Director General Grossi, says IAEA team was denied access to assess the incident as the plant cited safety risks. So the Russians not letting the International Atomic Agency representatives from inspecting what's going on probably indicates that it's the Russians what did it. Anyway, that's my tuppence. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.